And hello, everyone. Welcome to the Apptrepreneur. Is this the monthly Rideshare podcast? I don't know. It's been so long since we've done this. Anyway, I'm Kevin, the Apptrepreneur, and I have not done a video podcast style live stream in a long time, but you guys have asked for it. And it's like, you know what? Figured I would give it a whirl. And I decided to bring in a special guest to help test this. And that is Harry Campbell from the Rideshare Guy. So, hi, Harry.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. I'm excited to finally join one of your live streams. I think this is the first time we've actually collaborated directly together. I know we featured a couple of your videos on your channel, on our channel, and maybe vice versa. But I think this is the first time we're both together.
Yeah, and also I was in a couple of your videos and you were in a live stream, but yeah, we haven't actually collabed or anything. So this will be fun. So anyway, obviously you guys can read the title of the video, and that is we're talking about the very famous and controversial AB5. Now, Harry, I guess the first question I will start this conversation with is I don't think I know well, first of all, what do you think AB5, what is AB5 to you, and what do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? Why don't you share your stance on that?
Sure, yeah. And I think it may be helpful to provide a little background too, because obviously this is pretty complex. There's a lot going on. And I guess as of right now, when we're filming the bill itself, which would kind of codify this law of the ABC test, which basically Uber and Lyft are very scared of and would kind of basically just reaffirm that drivers are employees and entitled to all the protections and the minimum wage and all of that stuff that employees normally get. I guess the actual status of it right now, it's passed one of the first committees in the state Senate, I believe. So I think it has one more committee to pass out of, and then it would go to an actual vote on the floor of the Senate. And then I think the actual governor of California, Gavin Newsom, needs to sign the bill. So I guess as far as background and context, does that sound about right to you, Kevin?
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. That's what I've heard, and that's how I understand it.
Yeah. So, and then, to kind of give you the short answer as far as my position on AB5 is the short answer is I'm against it. I think that as it is right now, where drivers would basically become employees, I guess what I really feel is that there are a lot of unknowns, and you have both sides right now sort of saying this is going to happen, no, this is going to happen. And I think really we don't know. And right now, so, sort of the short answer, right, is going to be no, because I hate when politicians give the long answer and they don't answer the question. But the short answer is no. But the long answer is I think it's complex. And I think that ultimately what I like about AB5 is the fact that, Uber and Lyft are already negotiating. They don't want this to happen. So it puts drivers and the driver organizations and the labor unions, they have a lot of power right now. And I think that ultimately, even if AB5 doesn't pass, they're going to be able to get out a lot of concessions from Uber and Lyft, whether it's minimum wage, a driver organization like the IDG in New York, some labor protections, whatever it might be. It definitely seems like things are going to be better whether it passes or not once this whole thing is over.
Yeah. Now, my stance on AB5 is also a little complex because my channel went from like 3 years ago, and I've been around a long time. Not as long as you have, but I've been a long around there. And my original videos were I don't want regulation. You're a fool if you want regulation. Has definitely come to regulate the SOBs because they have taken such advantage of everyone, from me to my viewers to my friends to my fiance, and I just see them do it all the time. And they have no regard for human life, in my opinion, at this point. So I am definitely in favor of regulation. Now, that said, I'm not sure I fully agree with AB5 too. I think there are also too many unknowns. And the last podcast we did with the true Uber advisory board, which is Drive Girl Drive, who I think you know very well, and Uber Hints and your driver, Mike. I mean, Cecily and Mike and me were like, yeah, regulate them. And Mark brought up some very good points. What happens to our tax write-off, like our mileage write-off? What happens to our flexibility? I mean, those are things that are worth considering. So
Well, and I think that's my biggest thing is that, right now you have a lot of the proponents of AB5 who want drivers to employees saying, oh, there's nothing that says drivers can't be employees and can't be flexible. And I guess that's technically true. But I also, there are a whole lot of examples. I mean, most jobs as employees, it's a lot more restrictive and there's a lot more control. And so I at least think that that should be part of the discussion and that should be, that with any decision, there's definitely be downsides, right? I don't think it's all going to be positives one way or the other. I mean, right now we're sort of seeing that with Uber and Lyft, they're making the job less flexible. So if you love the flexibility of driving for Uber and Lyft, if it continues as is, they're basically going to treat you like an employee, but pay you like an independent contractor. So, I mean, that's kind of the other, which almost like is against my own argument, but, still that's the other side of it too.
Right. I actually personally believe the flexibility, current flexibility on Uber and Lyft is probably one of the biggest lies we tell ourselves. I mean, yeah, you can get on and off whenever you want, but if you're full
Exactly.
time and you're working 40, 50, 60, I know there's people who work 70 hours a week. It's like, I don't know. Are you really in control of your own schedule at that point?
Right. And I mean, even if you think about it, if you look at like Uber Quests, for example, right now they're telling you, okay, Monday through Thursday, you need to drive in these times in these places. Friday through Sunday, you need to drive in these times in these places. So you always have the ability to log on wherever and whenever you want. But if you want to make the most amount of money, which I think everyone watching right now probably wants to do that, then you do have to kind of play their game. And so I think that's the other thing to consider, right? That if AB5 doesn't pass and, let's say Uber and Lyft come to the table with a minimum wage, if there isn't some sort of structural change that, makes it so that drivers have bargaining power or something that kind of Uber and Lyft, they can always tweak things down the road. So you can't agree to things that are sort of like short-term solutions. Like I think you've covered what's going on in New York with the Lyft drivers right now. They're not able to go, they instituted this minimum pay per trip to try and get drivers a minimum wage, which is, I think, a good thing. But now Lyft isn't letting drivers go online in certain times and certain places, which, I think you kind of understand their point of view. If they have to pay minimum wage, they don't want you driving in the middle of nowhere on a Tuesday afternoon, right?
Right. And I have it on good authority that the minimum wage isn't really a minimum wage when you get down to it through, accounting
Yeah,
tricks. So,
technically, I think it's more of a minimum pay per trip. So you may not actually make the minimum wage per hour, but I believe they do reassess it every 6 months and look at the utilization rates. So in, the 6 month period, you may not be making the minimum wage per hour, but you are sort of making what they're saying you're supposed to make per trip. And then if the companies didn't pay you enough over that 6 month period, they kind of adjust the rates going forward. So it's kind of like a delayed minimum wage, if that makes sense.
well, I'd have to have some of my viewers from New York actually comment on that because obviously you and I are on the
Yeah.
opposite side.
And it is
Of that
confusing.
one. Yeah. So, I mean, I was telling people at the strike, and a lot of people were surprised by this. I said, ideally, I'd like AB5 to fail in an ideal world for Uber and Lyft to like dodge that bullet, realize, shoot, we dodged a bullet. We need to do something different and go back to actually come to the drivers and say, okay, we don't want this to even get back on the floor. What can
Yeah.
we do so that this doesn't happen again? Because here's the thing that I have been so critical of Uber and Lyft this whole time, and I've told them it never needed to get to this point.
Yeah.
3 years ago, nobody wanted regulation. Now everybody wants regulation. If there's
Yeah.
not a bigger example of how you have mistreated your drivers and how you have totally miscalculated this whole situation, that's the situation right there. I've seen the change. So I would like for the bill to fail, ideally, and for Uber and Lyft to voluntarily come to the table and come up with solutions. However, I've also added, I don't trust these companies to actually do that should that happen.
Yeah, I think that definitely that could be something I could get behind too, but I also think that the reality of is it might be a little bit of wishful thinking. And I think you bring up a good point though. I mean, for someone like you who's been doing it for a few years and someone like me, I started, driving part-time Uber and Lyft almost 5 years ago. Things were pretty good, there I think you're right. A lot of people didn't want or even need or think that regulation could help, but I do feel like there's a little bit part of me that kind of feels like, man, I wish that these companies wouldn't have screwed things up so bad, like I wish it didn't have to come to this. And I feel like that's part of me is why I'm not in support of AB5 because like deep down I've seen it work on, with the current model. And I feel like I wish if it could revert to that, then things could be good again and drivers could have that flexibility and make more money and there'd be less complaints about certain issues. But I mean, really, if you look at kind of like the high level trend, the macro trend of where things are headed, I mean, rates are coming down, things are getting less flexible. Uber and Lyft, and I mean, even a lot of the delivery companies, which I know you cover, are kind of trying to exert more control over the drivers, but still pay them like independent contractors. So I think when you look at the big picture of things, even though it may not be what we want, the trend that drivers want or what's good for them. I mean, it's kind of trending in favor of the companies big time. I think it's pretty obvious.
Right. And even some of these gig companies are really, and not just Uber and Lyft. I mean, Uber and Lyft are definitely making us think twice about what does it mean to be independent, because of, they're saying like, well, you can't do this, you can't do this, and basically they control everything but when we can get off. And by the way, in some cases, getting on and off the app could get you deactivated, and it's like, doesn't sound like we're independent very much. But then you also have, like, for example, Amazon Flex and DoorDash, at least initially DoorDash,
Yeah.
where they had timed blocks you could select. And it's like, so is that independent? I mean, technically you're picking your block, but if a block you want is available, and do you feel obligated to pick the time block you don't want? I mean, is that true freedom at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think the delivery companies are almost a whole different ball game just because there's so much block scheduling that's happening. And there was a big article that came out just yesterday or the day before about Instacart and kind of all the things they're doing to require, basically not require, but to sort of like, force drivers to take certain jobs or to do certain actions. And I think that, a lot of these companies are frankly like they're all kind of employing the same tactics. And I think that's where a lot of the drivers that are in support of AB5. I mean, you talked about earlier the full-time drivers. I mean, if I was a full-time driver, I feel like I would be pretty much, I don't see how I could not support AB5 just because I'm already working like an employee, but I'm getting paid like an independent contractor and don't have any of the benefits and don't have any of the worker protections like minimum wage or, what the disability, right? If you get injured or get into an accident, which, happens frequently to drivers, and probably you're at much higher odds of it happening if you're driving full time. So I totally get their point of view. But I guess it's really, I don't know. Do you think that, I mean, to me, it seems pretty clear that AB5 benefits the full time drivers a lot more than the part time drivers. And I feel like I don't see a lot of people talking about that fact either.
Well, yeah, of course it's going to benefit the full-time drivers a lot more. And yeah, I can and by the way, just so that everyone knows, like, I technically do have some skin in this game. Yeah, I'm not personally driving, but Katie, my fiance, is driving. And recently we did the budget, and she realized she had to make about $50 a week extra on Uber and Lyft, which is definitely doable even with their paltry rates. However, if AB5 passed, where does that put her? Can she easily do that? So obviously that would affect us.
Yeah, and I mean, frankly, in the future, someone like Katie, even though you and I like her, she may not be that valuable to a company, right? If they have to hire them as an employee and, kind of provide potential benefits or training or whatever it might be, all the stuff. I think a lot of us have worked an employee job at some point. And it kind of sucks, right?
Right.
Um,
But here's another interesting, I just thought of it, because one of the things about, let's say they do decide to do part-time employees, like they say, okay, we're going to have some people do part-time, and
yeah,
I think that would probably do the majority of people under 30 hours to avoid benefits. I mean, that's kind of what a lot of companies did when
yeah.
not to get too political, but when Obamacare passed, a lot of companies cut the hours to 30 hours so that they didn't
Yeah.
have to pay.
Well, and I mean, even under 40 hours, so you don't have to pay overtime too, right?
Right. Right. Well, I mean, because one of the things that people say they don't want to come from this bill is, they're like, well, one of Uber and Lyft's arguments, like, hey, when you're independent contractors, you can work for the other companies, you can switch between the apps, and I'm kind of like, yeah, but aren't Burger King and McDonald's people employees, and they can work at both companies? So do you think an AB5 passing would really prevent people from driving for both apps part time if they wanted to?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that it isn't, there aren't many people who work for both Burger King and McDonald's, but I think that it is, even as an employee, it is still technically possible. And I think that's really, kind of when it gets back to the unknowns. I think I know what AB5 supporters would say. They would say that, hey, it's possible. But I also know what Uber and Lyft would say. They'd say, no, we're not going to let drivers do both services. And ultimately, we really don't know until it happens. And Uber and Lyft start running the numbers and they decide that, hey, what, we want to keep people on our platform. We don't want them working for other competitors. And I don't know the specifics of how the law might work, but I'm assuming if you're an employer, you can, tell your employees not to work for your direct competitors. I don't know. That seems like a pretty basic thing to me, that could easily happen.
All right. Well, for the record, I actually, maybe this is a unique situation for me, but I live near McDonald's, Burger King, Chick-fil-A, and
Mhm.
the manager at the Burger King is the assistant manager at the McDonald's.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's
Well, then it definitely is possible. I guess, it sounds like maybe they make more money that way, or maybe they can't get enough shifts at one place versus the other. So, I think that if I had to take a guess, I think you're right. I think that people could still work for both Uber and Lyft.
right. Now, since we are actually kind of both on the page that we would really ideally not want AB5 to pass, we would just want Uber and Lyft to manage the system in a way that we liked. In your opinion, like what would be a good middle of the ground compromise so that Uber and Lyft can continue operating the way they are, but that we can have independent contractor status and that we have more control in how we, run our business?
Yeah. Well, I should honestly say I don't, I feel like I'm coming around on this. Like, I don't know if it would be the worst thing in the world if AB5 passed. I'm sort of like, I wanted to give an answer, so I said no. But now that we're getting into the details, I would say my answer is no. But if it passes, I don't know that it's that bad of a thing. I mean, there are a lot of companies that have a mix of employees who could be, the full-time drivers and independent contractors who kind of come in when it's really busy or come in when they need extra help around the holidays, right? A lot of businesses already use this hybrid model of employees and independent contractors. But I think I want to see, and what I think a lot of the drivers who are against AB5 want to see, is a true independent contractor relationship, right? If Uber and Lyft want to hire a bunch of employees, that's fine. They can give them the jobs, and maybe the scraps are kind of left over for the independent contractors, but they should kind of treat them as actual independent contractors. And I think that's the big thing that, the drivers who are against AB5, I feel like they want to remain independent contractors, but they want to actually be independent contractors.
Right. Right. I agree. Now, I was thinking about this for a while. Like, what system would I put in place? And ironically, I would, in my opinion, do like a cross between an eBay and a sidecar system
Hmm.
myself. I would say, okay, the entry to barrier for Uber and Lyft is this. This is like the lowest you can charge, the minimum you have to charge the customers. But based on on your ratings and time driven and the car model and stuff, you can actually say, I feel my time is worth this much, so you can charge this much.
Yeah.
And then when someone goes to call an Uber or Lyft, they would see all these different options, like these are the cars that are nearby, here's what their prices are, here are their models, and the customers could then pick what, maybe some want to pay for a fancier car, and by this system they would have a fairly good idea that they were going to get a higher quality car, and then the person would get all the information that they have, and then they could choose whether or not to accept that job or not. So I think there's a way to do this and have it still be independent. It's just,
Yeah.
does Uber want to give up that, for lack of a better word, control over, you're just going to accept the rides we send you?
Yeah, no, I like a solution like that. And I wrote an article a few weeks ago on the Rideshare guy. I can leave a link in the chat right now. But basically, at the end, I kind of proposed three solutions or three compromises. And one of them was just that. It was, okay, I know from talking to tens of thousands of drivers, and you probably know yourself, drivers want to be paid more. They want the ability to set their rates, something that allows them to have more control over the rates, as opposed to Uber and Lyft just saying, here's what the rates are. And so what I said was to either set rates at 70% of taxi rates in Los Angeles, for example. And what I liked about that type of solution is that it's structural, right? If you go out and say, let's raise the rates to $1 a mile, but then Uber starts making you drive much further to pick up your passenger, that dollar per mile doesn't matter so much anymore, right? If it's structural and you're paying a certain percentage of taxi rates, for example, and it's reassessed every 6 or 12 months, then every city has taxi rates, and you can kind of still, you're providing a discount to that. But you also have the ability to pay drivers. Uber and Lyft don't have 100% of the ability to set the rates. I just don't like them having 100% control of the rates. And that was kind of like option A. And option B was exactly what you described, where drivers could set the rates. So Uber and Lyft, they might suggest, okay, in LA, the average driver is charging 60 cents per mile, but you have the ability to set your own rate, kind of like sidecar. And then now you have drivers, and I guess they're sort of competing against themselves, but the drivers who are complaining that they don't want to drive for 60 cents a mile, they can set it to 80 cents. And during busy times, they're probably going to get those rides. And during less busy times, they're probably not going to get those rides. So is that sort of what you're describing or thinking about?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about. And maybe other features like, drivers don't have to accept Uber Pool, which I think is total BS in my opinion. That's not freedom at all. And maybe even like an option where it's like when the customers get in the Uber car, let's say they really like that person because like I have a buddy, Dark Road Run.
Yeah.
He's got this amazing car set up like video games you can play on the ceiling and everything. It's like have a feature in there where it's like maybe the customers can favorite that person,
Yeah.
then they could like maybe call them in advance or something. It's like then the drivers have value, but they're still independent to take those jobs.
Yeah. And so, what I think you're sort of getting at is the fact that drivers need some type of bargaining or some type of organization, because there's going to be a lot of these types of things that we're describing. And there's going to be stuff that comes up in the future that drivers sort of need a real voice. Like you joked, Uber has their driver advisory forum and Lyft has their driver advisory council. But I think I think you even did a video on this that Uber just came out with, some like very minor improvements. But if there was an actual organization, kind of like vying for what drivers care about and what they need, then they can kind of start negotiating that on behalf of drivers. So I actually like, Uber and Lyft, their CEO penned this op-ed, and I think that what they offered is a pretty good starting point. They offered a minimum wage, and I think that there should be some type of floor that drivers can't make less than a certain amount. And they offered a driver organization and some other stuff along the lines of benefits. I think drivers should ask for a lot more than that, but I think those two things, and then maybe something around the rates and giving drivers that ability to either set their own rates or raise the rates up a little, I think that could be a pretty good compromise to answer your original question.
Right. So, right. No, I agree. There needs to be a lot more than that, especially because whenever I talk about these Uber advisory boards, and I say it very advisory board, very, very sarcastically, because amazingly, in all these advisory board meetings, all of these discussions I have, all the listening, all the suggestions, no one apparently ever brings up the pay in any of these meetings.
Yeah, well,
Like,
I'm sure that pay is brought up, and I think DoorDash even had a similar survey recently, and the number one thing, surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, wasn't pay. It was like something about, I don't know, transparency or all that. So I think that generally, like these companies, they know that drivers want to be paid more, and that's kind of their number one demand, but that's not really what they want to do. It's not in their best interest, and so I think that it kind of is really emblematic of the whole situation, right? When you give Uber and Lyft the keys to the car, they sort of are going a little too far in the wrong direction, right? It's kind of like Uber has 100% of the say in all these different areas. If drivers even had 10 or 20%, or ideally 50%, if it was more of an actual partnership, Uber likes to call drivers partners, but it's not really a partnership. I think if drivers actually had a say, then some of these issues would start to get addressed.
right. And it's funny you should mention DoorDash because a video is going up later today about that CEO's comments, and boy, do I rip into him for that one. So I know your time was actually limited today, so I thank you again for coming up. But I do want to end with this final question. It's kind
Sure.
of like a two-part question, if you will, and then you can go on making your high definition videos. And I can continue making my standard definition videos. But what is the best thing you hope could come from AB5 passing, and what is the worst thing you fear could happen from AB5 passing?
I think the best thing that could happen from AB5 passing is that all of those full time drivers are going to kind of get their due, right? I mean, even though I'm not a full time driver, and, frankly, a majority of drivers aren't full time drivers, a lot of drivers that are, like working 40, 50, 60 hours a week for Uber and Lyft is a really tough job. It's something that is very difficult. And even though they're a smaller percentage of the workforce of drivers, if AB5 passes, I think that their lives are going to get a lot better. So I think that's definitely a positive. And also, just in general, I think it's going to be kind of like a little bit of an awakening moment for Uber and Lyft in the sense that, hey, they need to really stop talking about treating drivers better and actually doing it. The law and the regulation is going to require it. So that's how I would answer the first part. And then I think the second part was what would be the worst thing that could happen, or
What the second? I'm sorry.
second part of your question was
The
what's
second
the
part of
worst
the
thing
question:
that
what's
could
the
happen
worst
from
thing that could
AB5?
happen from
Yeah, I
AB5
think the
passing?
worst thing that could happen, that's a good question, but I think the worst thing that could happen from AB5 passing is that a lot of drivers, a lot of the part-time drivers, either lose their jobs or can't work when and where they want. Maybe kind of the schedule that they want. And, I think that you hear from a lot of drivers, whether they're like stay-at-home moms or college students, right? There's millions of different reasons that people drive. And even though we talked about how the flexibility can sometimes be a bit of a sham, there's definitely times and places and people where the flexibility is life-saving, or like really allows them to pay bills, to pay rent, to keep their apartment. So I think that would really be the downside, is that for some of those drivers who need it in more of that temporary or flexible nature, it could go away with AB5. They could be kind of like casualties of AB5, I guess you would say.
Awesome. Well, I actually thought of one more question after that, but I'll
All
share
right,
my
let's do
answer
it.
first. But I actually agree with pretty much everything you say. The biggest thing that I would hope that would happen if it passed was that, yeah, the full time drivers, they aren't getting screwed. They're actually, because benefits, like, don't poo poo benefits. They're really nice, especially
Yeah,
when you get into like the 401k and the college tuition and stuff.
right.
That's really
And I mean,
that would
especially if you're not getting them from, if you have a full-time job or a part-time job where you get benefits and you do Uber and Lyft on the side, who cares about the benefits? But if you don't have that, then you really care about the benefits. You really care about healthcare.
Right, and maybe if you go over 40 hours a week, which Uber and Lyft wouldn't let you do, then you'd actually get time and a half, and
Yeah.
it's so all that stuff would obviously be a positive thing, and heck, even if it, I mean, heck, if it passes and Uber and Lyft even does the unthinkable, they rework the system so that you're still independent contractors. It's just now you know upfront where you're going and
Yeah.
everything.
I mean,
That's the other positive thing that could
you know,
happen. They might
I
be so.
I think that's the other thing that could happen, right? I mean, Uber and Lyft, if this thing passes, Uber and Lyft say, "You know what? We don't wanna pay these guys like employees. Let's make them actual independent contractors, let them set their own rates, tell them, where the rider's going ahead of time, let you favorite your driver," all this stuff that we want. I don't know, maybe that's wishful thinking, though.
I don't know if it's as wishful thinking as you would think. I
Yeah,
mean,
I don't
that
know if
actually
it
sounds
is.
like the most logical thing they do, because they really don't want to pay anything employee. They don't want to have employees. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
So now the worst thing that could happen, of course, is the biggest concern is like they would take that so literally that they would only hire full time drivers, part timers wouldn't be there, and yeah, some people would get these sucky shifts don't have any um, that don't have any rides. And maybe, I mean, we haven't really discussed it, although I think they've kind of more or less done away with this anyway. But the surge could, in a sense, go away.
Mhm.
Like that's probably like my biggest concern. Granted,
Yeah,
Uber and Lyft
I
have kind of
mean,
been taking away the surge anyway with their upfront pricing,
that's
but
the thing, so one final thing too that I want to add is I do think a pay floor makes a lot of sense. I don't think you should have people, whether it's their fault or not, going out and making $2-3 an hour. But I think that definitely the upside could be limited, right? For the drivers who are in the busier cities, LA, San Francisco, for the drivers who only do surge rides, or who have the strategies. I mean, like we feature guys all the time. I get emails right now from people in LA who are struggling to make minimum wage. One of our contributors in LA, Sergio, we post his screenshots of his earnings all the time. He's over $30 an hour, even after the rate cuts, but that's because he only drives surge and he has a very specific strategy and he's very experienced and really knows what he's doing. But I feel like in the future, like those kind of upside, earning potentials could go away. So like the top drivers could, not be able to make those amounts anymore. So that could be another casualty. And I guess that kind of that's kind of like what my business is all about, right? Helping drivers make more money and get into that top 1 or 5%. So I guess a little bit selfishly or personally that could hurt me.
right. Well, especially since you and we're in one of the few markets that still have the surge multiplier.
Yeah.
So
Well,
like,
and that's the point. That's another good point, right? Like the earnings potential is still there in some of these markets where there's a surge multiplier, but I'm sure at some point in LA, Uber is going to switch to a flat rate surge, and then that limits your upside right there. So, that's the thing, right? Like there's all these positives that we've talked about that could go away with AB5, but Uber and Lyft are also getting rid of them as we speak, even with the current system. So that's
oh,
kind of my biggest
oh
worry.
yeah, I actually predicted that the surge would be an upfront surge by May in time for the summer rush, and well, I guess I was clearly wrong. Although I also expected Disneyland to be sold out because of Star Wars Galaxy Edge, so I guess I'm not very good at predicting things sometimes.
That's all right. Nobody
But
is.
So the final question,
Sure.
this one probably shouldn't be too difficult. I think I know what you're going to say, but if AB5 passes, do you think Uber, Lyft, Postmates, DoorDash, you think all these companies would leave California?
I would say absolutely not. The market is just way too big, and it's funny. I keep saying that this is a complex issue. The other thing to think about is this is already law, right? So this is already the ABC test was kind of, or maybe it's not law, but it's sort of already in the books. And so right now, like this AB5 is really just codifying this decision, and I don't even know exactly what that means. I just keep hearing everyone say it, and Uber and Lyft could easily just say, you know what? Screw you guys, California regulators. We're going to just keep doing our thing, and you guys have to come after us. I mean, what are they going to do? They have got this individual arbitration agreement. So if drivers wanted to sue Uber and Lyft, they would have to figure out how to go through arbitration, and it gets pretty complex. I think even if you look at the Dynamex case that started this whole thing, that was a 10-year. It took 10 years to resolve that. So if Uber and even if this thing passes and Uber and Lyft just say, hey, we're not going to listen to you, we don't care, I don't know what would happen. It's sort of like that's another unknown, but I think that it could easily get caught up in the courts for years to come.
Yeah, my neighbor, Uncle Mike, he used to have this saying, like the reason he felt politics was totally unnecessary and useless, although he still voted, obviously,
Yeah,
is because he said we don't need new laws typically. We just need to enforce the ones we already have,
yeah,
which
definitely.
definitely describes this in a nutshell. And personally, I would say no, they're not going to leave California. California is too big of a market. It's way, not to mention most of them are headquartered here, so that
Yeah.
would.
Well, and I think that I think you and I are on the same page that these companies both really do not want AB5 to pass. I mean, when the CEOs pen a joint op-ed, it's like enemies coming together. They're like, they hate this thing so much that they're willing to come together to fight against it. That should be a pretty clear signal that they are going to do everything in their power to not allow this to pass. And even if it does pass, I still think that they've got one or two or three things that they could do to try and stop it, even if it passes. So
Yeah, I kind of wondered, like, when they did that, like, joint statement, did they like say hi and like call each other like names before they made that statement? Because they really don't like one another.
yeah, I can only imagine that there are probably like 10 people on Uber's side behind the scenes and 10 people on Lyft's side, kind of making all these edits back and forth. And they probably had at least 25 different meetings before that thing finally got published. But hey, they got it out there. So,
Yep. Well, it'll be interesting to see what. Actually, one more brief question, then we'll pretty much wrap it up.
all right, let's do it.
Do you think Governor Newsom will actually sign this thing if it gets to his desk?
Yeah, I guess that's another one of the one, two, three things that we need to consider. And to be honest, I'm not what you would call a political scholar, or I'm not that. I mean, I guess I live in California, so I can sort of make a guess. But the thing I've seen just from someone who's not really in the politics scene is it seems like Governor Newsom, he kind of is known for being on the side of labor, but he's also known for being on the side of all these tech companies. So I feel like for him, he really does not want, he kind of wants a compromise pretty badly, and he doesn't want to have to pick one side or the other. So I don't know that he would even sign it. I think that he might push the companies and the organizers or the labor unions to compromise at that point, and maybe he just refuses to sign it, period, until they work out a compromise, kind of, pass the buck to the companies and make them work something out. So that's the other thing. It does. The more we talk about it, it's like a long way to go, it seems like.
Yeah, I personally believe he will not sign it. I believe he will veto it because it's too much in favor of one group over the other, and he's going to want to push for compromise. And
Yeah.
honestly, for everyone's sake, I really hope, because here's the thing, Uber, Lyft, it doesn't need to be this way. I keep saying it over and over, just pay them decently, and you have everyone on your side again. But
Yeah,
that's
I mean, I think that would be the ideal solution, but I think you and I are also realists, and although we want that to happen, we know it probably won't.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh no. I mean, I'll have to say, like, on a personal level, like, because I talk about all the companies, Uber and Lyft the most obviously, but
Yeah.
like when Instacart was caught stealing tips, which is what DoorDash does,
Hmm.
I was like not surprised, reported it as usual, and then Instacart got the backlash, and they were like, okay, you know what? Nobody likes this, so we're gonna go back to the way it used to be, and it
Yeah.
was like, what? You actually listened, and now we're not complaining about you anymore, and you can go along your business? What
Yeah.
a novel concept.
Hey, what about this idea? I mean, what if Lyft, just decided, that's sort of the perfect example, right? Like, because now everyone still hates on DoorDash for that tipping issue, and Instacart's completely out of the news for it, although they're back in the news for some other issue. But I mean, what if one of the companies, Uber or Lyft, let's say it's Lyft, just decides to come out and say, hey, you know what? We're gonna make all our drivers employees. We want to treat them better. I mean, that I feel like if you were like going to go for a home run shot as Lyft, like that could be something. If you're really trying to take out Uber, that could be like the home run shot. That could be interesting.
Yeah. Well, first, actually, one of the things that Lyft could do, because we all know what their upfront pricing really is, so they can take this much money. I
Yeah.
don't know if like the shareholders would let them do this at this point, but it's like they could say, "Hey, we're going to pay our drivers better, but we're not going to raise the prices." Like, talk about a PR home run.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we'll see. Well, I appreciate you having me on, and we're actually on my channel. We're going to have a short 10 to 15 minute interview with Lorena Gonzalez coming out probably later this week. Ezra, one of my contributors who you saw up in Sacramento, we were able to snag a very quick, because she didn't have a lot of time, 10-minute interview with Lorena Gonzalez. So we'll be publishing that later on the channel. So whether you agree with AB5 or not, you can kind of at least hear from the sponsor of the bill, kind of what she thinks about it, why she wanted it in the first place, and at least hear from that point of view, so you can make a informed decision.
Right. And I always encourage people to listen to all the points of view, even if they're not part of your political affiliated
Yeah,
party.
definitely.
It's like that. That's why I register independent. I want all the pamphlets, so that I like to do my research on that. But yeah, so I will definitely be watching that. I encourage my viewers to watch that. And we've actually got 87 people watching live. I know we have not been talking to them because we've been talking to each other, but I would like to thank all of them. And if they sent super chats, I definitely appreciate that as well. Thank you all for watching and listening. Once again, this is Harry Campbell, the rideshare guy. He a blog and a YouTube channel. I'll put the links for both below in the comments. But yeah, thank you. Is there any final comments you want to make, Harry, before we log off?
No, I think that about covers it. We've also got 2 podcasts. We just launched a new podcast with Jay Crater, one of our contributors. This one, on my podcast, The Rideshare Guy, it's available on iTunes and Stitcher and all that. We tend to cover more of like the industry topics, like AB5 and rideshare. But Jay just launched a new podcast where it's really kind of like by drivers, for drivers. He's doing interviews with drivers, passengers, then kind of recapping the news. So it's twice a week, Monday and Thursday. It's called The Rideshare Dojo. So that's a cool one that we just launched. There's already a bunch of episodes up, so that's another one if you guys want to check more stuff out.
All right, and as everyone watching this channel knows, there's daily videos on this channel as well. There's going to be 2 more later on. I fell asleep pretty early last night, so I didn't get to editing until this morning. But anyway, so thank you, Harry, once again for joining. It's a very interesting experiment. Once again, what happens when high definition streaming meets standard definition streaming? I'm
not that high def. It's only 1080p camera from Amazon. It's cheap, 20-30 bucks. I think you can afford it.
Oh, don't get me started on Amazon. We don't have time for that. But anyway, so folks, subscribe to my channel, subscribe to his channel, like, share, comment this video, and let us know what you thought of the overall video style podcast. To begin with, I know that we've considered doing that for the monthly Rideshare podcast, and who knows, if reception to this is good, maybe we'll just do it. Who knows? So, all right, thank you once again, and everyone, as always, flame responsibly.
Thanks, guys.